Welcome to Libeth. The Hojoki appears to contain almost no characters at all. In reality, it contains several, but they emerge less as individuals than as forces shaping Chōmei's understanding of impermanence. Kyoto itself becomes a living presence, beautiful, unstable, repeatedly wounded. The dead of the famine become embodiments of social fragility. The hut becomes nearly human in the care with which it is described. And at the center stands Chōmei himself, not as a heroic sage, but as a man attempting to disappear from the world while remaining painfully aware that complete disappearance may be impossible. The Hojoki contains, in the conventional sense, almost no characters. There are no named figures whose psychology is developed, no relationships traced through time, no scenes of confrontation or dialogue. What the text contains is a narrator who is also the subject, a city that behaves like a person, a crowd of unnamed dead, a hut that is described with more care than any human being in the text, and a young companion who appears briefly and is released. Out of these almost characters, Chōmei builds something that functions like a portrait, because the absence of other fully realized figures forces all the weight of human interest onto the narrator himself. And what emerges from that weight is one of the most honest self-portraits in Japanese literature. Chōmei himself appears in 3 distinct registers across the text, and the movement between them is part of the book's architecture. In the disaster sections, he is a witness, precise, controlled, almost journalistic in his distance from the events he is recording. He counts bodies. He notes the direction the fire traveled. He describes the specific appearance of collapsed buildings after the earthquake, with the attention of someone who is looking very hard at something and refusing to look away from it. There is no self-pity in this register. There is something closer to the attention a physician brings to a body, careful, accurate, oriented toward understanding rather than feeling. The disasters did not happen to him in any direct sense. They happened to the city, to the thousands who died in the famine, to the buildings and the political order. He was present. He observed. He wrote it down. In the housing autobiography sections, a different Chōmei becomes visible, the man who is also moving, who is not merely watching the world change, but changing within it. The blocked shrine succession is present in this section as a kind of silence. It is mentioned without drama and then released, but the fact that he moves from house to smaller house, progressively away from the center, is unintelligible without the knowledge of what he was moving away from. The succession failure did not merely deny him income and position. It stripped away the framework that had given his life its expected shape. He had organized himself around a future that was then foreclosed, and the housing autobiography is the account of what he did with the years that followed, the slow, deliberate process of reduction that was also a process of understanding what the life he had wanted had actually been made of, and what he discovered when he stopped wanting it. In the hut sections, a third Chōmei appears, the one who has arrived, who has found something that works, who describes his daily life with a contentment that seems, in the reading, both genuine and earned. He plays music alone, for no audience. He reads poetry without the social machinery of the court competition surrounding it. He walks in the hills and pays attention to what is there. He notes the seasonal changes with a pleasure that is not aesthetic performance, but something more basic, the pleasure of a person who is actually present in the place where they are. This Chōmei is the most serene figure in the text, and his serenity is the setup for the reversal that comes at the end. Because the fourth Chōmei, the one who appears in the final pages, turns on all the others. He is the one who asks the question that the rest of the text has been building toward without knowing it. If impermanence is the fundamental condition, if attachment to things is the source of suffering, if the project of the last decades has been a genuine movement toward non-attachment, then what is this love of the hut? What is this attachment to the music, and the view, and the specific quality of light on a particular morning? The Buddhist framework he has inhabited says, this is still attachment. The human being writing the text says, and I cannot release it, and I am not sure I want to. He does not resolve the tension. He names it, invokes amid a Buddha, and stops writing. What that final Chōmei gives the reader is something rarer than wisdom. He gives them honesty about the limits of his own achievement, stated without self-pity and without the false comfort of a resolution that has not been reached. The city of Kyoto is a character in a way that no single human figure in the text is. It has a personality that is defined by contradiction. It is beautiful and it burns. It is the center of the most aesthetically sophisticated culture in Japanese history, a world of refined poetry and ceremonial precision and architectural elegance. And it is also the city that half-starved to death in 1181 and shook to rubble in 1185. Chōmei describes it with the attentiveness that he brings to the disasters themselves, precisely, without sentimentality, in a way that makes the beauty and the destruction continuous with each other rather than opposed. The city that burns is not a city that has been interrupted in its beauty. It is a city whose beauty was always co-present with its fragility. The Heian capital was a place that required constant maintenance, political, social, physical, to sustain the appearance of permanence. And when that maintenance failed, the underlying impermanence became visible quickly and catastrophically. Chōmei loved Kyoto. The Hojoki is partly a long, quiet act of grief for it. But it is grief without sentimentality, which means it is not grief for a Kyoto that should have been otherwise, but for a Kyoto that was always going to be exactly as it was, and that he watched, and that he eventually had to leave. The dead of the famine are the most politically charged presence in the text, because they are the people for whom there was no philosophy of withdrawal available. They could not build smaller houses. They could not reduce their lives to the minimum. Their lives were already at the minimum, and the minimum failed them. Chōmei describes them specifically without naming them. The man and the child found dead together, famine-thinned, the man's body used as a pillow. The thousands, whose bodies he counted in the streets of a district of the capital. He does not draw an explicit moral from them. He does not editorialize. But their presence in the text does something that no amount of explicit argument could. It locates the philosophical claims about impermanence and withdrawal within a world where impermanence took the form of mass death, and where withdrawal was not an option for most of the people experiencing it. The Hojoki is often read as a text about individual spiritual practice. The famine dead are there to remind you that the individual spiritual practice happens against a background of collective suffering, and that any honest account of the world must contain both. The unnamed companion appears near the end of the text, a young person, name unrecorded, who shared some of Chōmei's years on the mountain. He is present for only a few sentences and then released, but those sentences do considerable work. The Hojoki presents itself as a document of solitude, and the companion complicates that self-presentation in a way that Chōmei seems fully aware of. The hut was not entirely alone. The life was not without human bond. The final self-interrogation about attachment is partly an interrogation of this bond. The recognition that the human connection that persisted through the withdrawal is itself a form of attachment, and that the Buddhist framework would ask him to release it too, and that he is uncertain whether he can. The companion is unnamed and barely described, but the fact that Chōmei includes him at all, in a text so rigorously stripped of other presences, suggests that the inclusion is not accidental. He is the human residue of the social world, the one thing that did not get released when everything else was released. The hut itself is the most fully realized non-human character in the text. Its dimensions are recorded with precision. Its method of construction, its contents, its orientation within the landscape, its portability, all described with a care that exceeds the description of any person in the text. This is deliberate. The hut is not a background or a setting. It is the argument made physical, the philosophical position instantiated in wood and dimensions, the answer to the question of what a human life actually requires given an honest accounting. The care Chōmei brings to its description is the care of someone who has thought very hard about what they are doing and why, and who wants the reader to understand that the smallness is not arbitrary. 10 feet square is not the result of limitation. It is the result of subtraction, of removing everything that is not necessary and measuring what remains. And then the final turn. Is the hut itself the problem? Is the love of this precisely constructed sufficiency the last form of attachment, the one that the withdrawal itself produced? The hut is both the solution and the question. It is the answer to the impermanence of the world, and simultaneously, in the final pages, the site of Chōmei's remaining attachment. He loves it. He cannot fully release even the thing he built to practice release. This is not a failure. It is what makes the text honest, and what makes the hut, as a character, something more than a symbol. It is a real 10-foot building on a real mountain, and it is also the shape of a life's attempt to find a form adequate to an unstable world, and the discovery that even the most adequate form leaves something unreleased. What makes the Hojoki's treatment of character unusual is its rejection of dramatic psychology in favor of existential position. Chōmei is defined less by emotion than by relationship. Relationship to disaster, to society, to solitude, to attachment, and finally to his own inability to achieve perfect detachment. Even the unnamed companion mentioned late in the text matters, because his existence interrupts the fantasy of total isolation. Meanwhile, the hut itself becomes the most intimate object in the book precisely because it represents a constructed answer to instability. Every character in the Hōjōki ultimately revolves around the same question. How should a human being live in a world where nothing remains secure for long? That's all for today on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.